Good evening. Before we begin our study for tonight, I wanted to say a few words about VBS since it's coming up so very quickly. It's less than 2 weeks away now. So I wanted to introduce what we're talking about this year, which is, I don't know, Ken, you might move it back. I'm not sure why it went forward. But it's the topic of wilderness wanderers. And this is for the kids, but this is also what the adult class is going to be talking about. So I wanted to give you a little sneak peek of what's to come. It's following the theme of the wilderness through the Bible, at least 4 little glimpses of the theme, because the theme pretty much goes from the beginning to the end of the Bible. But for us, we've picked 4 topics to talk about on this theme. The first one is being cast out of the Garden of Eden into the wilderness. The second one is the Israelites is the Pharaoh and Moses and the Israelites wandering in the wilderness at that point. Third one is they're wandering in the wilderness after getting to the promised land and then having to return and wander for 40 years. And then the last one is the Israelites, after they eventually come into the promised land, they're being sent back out of the promised land into exile, into a wilderness, if you will. So those are the 4 topics, and Dennis is looking over the adult classes, and he's aligning all of that up. So for the adult classes, or for the adults, you will have class at the same time as the kids. And for the kids, this is a great opportunity, one of the, I guess, probably the best one out of the year for any young families that you know, if you want to introduce them to Jesus, to the Bible, to the church, whatever it is. This is probably the best opportunity throughout the year of events here at church, at least one of the best, to invite them to. So there will be registration forms that we put out here soon. You can already click the link in the newsletter to register online if you're bringing your kids or whatever it is. So just so you know, that's coming up. If you are an adult who wants to help out, we have all of our teachers lined up and that kind of thing. But if you want to let me know, if you want to do something, there's always something that pops up that I can point you toward that would be super helpful. I know right now one thing that I thought of today that we need is someone to ring the bell every time. So if you're someone who thinks you can ring a bell 4 times over the course of 2 days, I believe in you and come talk to me, all right? So if that's something you're interested in or something else, just let me know if you want to help out, and we will definitely find a place to put you to work. Tonight, we're rejoining Paul in Greece, following along on what we call his second missionary journey. And if you want, you can open your Bible to Acts chapter 17. That's where we're going to spend our time tonight. Acts chapter 17. Just to recap, for those of you who were here but have slept since then, and for those of you who weren't here last Sunday night, this is where we're joining Paul on his second missionary journey as he starts in Antioch and goes through these places in Asia Minor, what we call Turkey. And here at Neapolis is where he sets foot on European soil with the gospel for the first time, that at least we know of. So he sets foot in Neapolis. He takes the Ignatian Way, the Via Ignatia, to Philippi. And this big picture, what I'm wanting us to notice here is the summer of AD 50. He begins this journey. He gets to Amphipolis, Apollonia, Thessalonica, and Berea is where we left off last week. So he gets to Berea in May of AD 51. So he's been at this for almost a year now, and so we covered pretty much a year last week. And tonight, we're going to sit down and camp out with him in Athens, Greece, May through July of AD 51. So really quickly to catch us up, this is a kind of a geographic glimpse at where Paul embarked on this journey. He starts down here, again, in Antioch, and this is not the most scientific map, but it's a beautiful map that was on a floor of a church in Philippi. Also, I guess I should say for context, we just got back from here, so that's why I'm talking about this, because I wanted to bring some kind of present, and my present is coming in the form of pictures. So we're joining Paul in his journey. So we were here just a few weeks ago. He comes up to here, goes up, this is Troas, which is the last part of his journey in Asia Minor, sails over to Neapolis, and then goes up to Philippi, over to Thessalonica and Berea, down to Athens, and then Corinth is where we'll be next time. And we'll probably talk about that. I'm not exactly sure when, maybe next month. We'll see. Depends on how this month shakes out. But tonight, we're going to camp out with him right here in Athens, Greece. So we hop on a plane again to go to Greece, not quite in the way of Paul, but much more convenient. Fly to Greece, land there. Again, this is just for fun mainly, the Greek name of these places that we're talking about. So this is how you say Greece in Greek, Alada. So we land in Greece with Paul, where he starts at Neapolis. And this is the modern city of Kavala. It's pretty dark on here, but this is where we begin our journey with Paul. He walks on the Via Egnatia to Philippi. From Philippi, he goes to Amphipolis, or through Amphipolis, through Apollonia, ends up in Thessalonica, and then in Berea. So that catches you up. If you want more detail on those places, then go back to last week, online at least, and you can see pictures and whatnot there. But tonight, we are picking up with Paul in Athens. Actually, we are picking up with Paul on the road between Berea and Athens, because there were a couple of places that we stopped off that I wanted to share just a glimpse of with you, because they're not directly applicable to Paul, but they're places that he might have stopped at, he at least walked past or near, and they're places that I think hold some significance for us. So this is in between Berea and Athens. And this is Metaora. So you can't see it super well, but you can tell that right here on the top of this rock is a monastery. You can tell it's a building. Hopefully you can see it. There's a monastery right there. There's another one over here. So there are a few in this picture. So this is roughly in between Berea and Athens. And this also kind of gives you a glimpse at the topography of the region. This is a really beautiful part of the country. Metaora is what I call them, Metaora monasteries. Metaora means suspended in the air in Greek. And if you can tell from where the monasteries are, that's actually probably the lowest one to the ground. You can kind of tell why they were called that, right? Suspended in the air, the Metaora monasteries. They were a group of Eastern Orthodox monasteries, Greek Orthodox monasteries. And they were built between the 14th and 16th centuries. And there were 24 at most back in the 16th century. And today there are 6 that are still open to the public. And I share this with you just to illustrate that Paul is still having an impact. These are from the 14th through 16th centuries. So this missionary journey of Paul is still impacting the region that he traveled in. At this point, 1,500 years later, and still today, these are still open and they're still active monasteries. So, just kind of an interesting note. Also, in case you were wondering, there were not elevators or escalators or stairs originally. So the monks that went up to these monasteries had to climb their own way. So they used ropes. They essentially rock climbed up to the top and trust me, so I enjoy rock climbing. I used to be really into rock climbing. I would not have been climbing these, I'll tell you that, because they're terrifying. Actually, if you are a James Bond fan, you might recognize this scene, which is from the Metaora monasteries. So if you want, you can Google this and watch James Bond swinging and climbing and all that stuff off of these rock faces. It's pretty crazy to see. So those are the Metaora monasteries. The other thing I wanted to show you from in between Berea and Athens is this song. So this is in Delphi. If you've heard of the Oracle of Delphi, that's where this is. And this is musical notation that's carved onto this rock. So there are 2 hymns here. They're called the Delphic hymns. They were hymns glorifying the Greek god Apollo. These are from 138 BC and 128 BC. And that makes them the oldest surviving examples of ancient Greek musical notation. The first one, and I'm bringing this up because, we're Church of Christ, right? We're known for our music. And this is actually the earliest clear example of notated music in the Western world with a known composer. So this goes all the way back to 150 years or so before the time of Christ, at least before his time of ministry. So the first hymn uses vocal notation, which is what we use, essentially, I guess, the ancient version of it, shape notes. And then the second hymn employs instrumental notation. So I just thought it was a really interesting thing to see from what we know in the Western world, again, the oldest example of musical notation. Now, after our journey with Paul through the countryside of Greece, from Berea, we're joining him at Athens. And again, if you want, you can open to Acts 17. The verses for tonight are not going to be on the PowerPoint. We're going to be reading them together in our own Bibles. And that's partially because we're going to read pretty much the entirety of Paul's sermon here in Acts 17. So I wanted to share that together, reading it in our own Bibles. Now, this is 1,972 years ago, okay? So if I looked it up this time, and that is exactly how far back in time we're going. 1,972 years, back to exactly this time of year, May through July of AD 51. This is the Parthenon. You probably can tell, even though it's a little bit dim. This is also the Parthenon, but it incorporates some of the people in this audience. A couple years ago, the youth group and I, at least some of the youth group, got to go on a road trip, and we stopped off in Nashville. So this is a picture of a few of us. If you didn't know, they have like a life-size replica of the Parthenon in Nashville. So this is a picture of us at a remake of the Parthenon. Just thought it was fun to include that, just to show you also how big this thing is. You can kind of tell from this picture as well, but this is a rebuilt version of the Parthenon. Now, when we talk about the Parthenon, that's like the modern symbol of Athens, and in a lot of ways the ancient symbol of Athens as well. It's just an incredibly beautiful and significant building. But for us, for our purposes, what you might not know, that the Parthenon was a temple. So it was a place of worship to Athena, who was the patron goddess of the city of Athens. So it's a place of worship, and it's on the Acropolis. So this picture is taken from down below. It's actually taken from the Agora of Athens, we'll talk about in a moment. But this up here is the Acropolis. Now, we talked about this last week. The Acropolis is the elevated, fortified part of a city. So basically, at least as these cities are being built up, if they come under attack at some point, you flee to the Acropolis because it's up high, it's fortified, it's a safer place to be. So this is the Acropolis of Athens, and on the Acropolis are several buildings, all of which that I remember are temples. So this is a place of worship. They've made it into a place of worship up on top of the Acropolis. So the Parthenon is up here. You can kind of see it right there. But you can also see right here, like down in this valley, the Agora of Athens. This is the marketplace of Athens. The Agora was the center of their public life. So it was kind of a combination of downtown and a university and all kinds of like legal offices, that kind of thing. Actually, just a side note, like right here is where Socrates did a lot of his debating. So like right there. So this is a place of great history in really the history of the world, but including the history of Athens. This is a modern demo of what it looked like back in the day. So you can see some of the different buildings. One thing I want you to notice, because it's about to become important, is if you can read some of these words, you'll notice how many of them are temples. And we're going to focus down here especially at the Temple of Apollo and this temple to Hephaestus and that kind of thing. So down in this corner, we're going to focus. But just notice how many of these are temples. There are temples and altars all over of this region of the world. Now, pick up with me in Acts chapter 17, with that in mind, and verse 16. Now, while Paul was waiting for them, for his companions, remember he's on this journey with a few different people, he's waiting for them at Athens, his spirit was provoked within him as he saw that the city was full of idols. A couple historical notes. Petronius said that it was easier to find a god than a man in Athens. So that's how many, like, idolatrous, fake, we would say, like, fake gods there are in Athens. And then Pausanias, who was a traveler and geographer from the 2nd century, said that there were more images in Athens than in the rest of Greece combined. So that just to illustrate how religious this city was. This city was incredibly religious. Paul's here after its heyday, so Athens has gone down some. Obviously, Rome is now over the world, so it's no longer like the center of culture in the world. Still incredibly important, though. But as part of their rise, and then even more so as they descend as a city, they hold on to their religion to give them hope, to give them significance. So there are altars and temples, again, all over Athens. So Paul sees this. His spirit is provoked within him. Verse 17, so he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons in the marketplace. Now that's the Greek word agora, translated marketplace. So that's this area right here. He's reasoning in the marketplace every day. So when you hear marketplace, don't just think like a small farmer's market. This is a big old place, all right? This is like where all of, at least a lot of the major philosophies that have impacted the world have come out of different corners of this agora. So he's reasoning in the marketplace every day and in the synagogue with those who happened to be there. Now, this right here, obviously he probably would have been in different places reasoning in the agora, but right down here, hopefully my big fat head is not in the way, but right here is the place where we can be most confident that Paul was reasoning, right here in front or in the Stoa of Zeus. The Stoa was just like a open-air gathering space, and they would use it for debating and that kind of thing. So right here, and here's a picture of what it looks like today. Paul would have been in this area and other places around the agora reasoning about the Christian faith, about Jesus. Also, this is a temple of Apollo right here as well, so kind of the Stoa and temple of Apollo together. And this right here is a temple to Hephaestus, who was another Greek god. So I know it's kind of a lot coming at you, and if you don't like history, then this might be tougher to get through. I love history, if you couldn't tell. So hopefully, if you don't like history, my prayers are with you. But I think it's going to be interesting as we get to the text, all right? So hang in there with me. This temple to Hephaestus, another temple right here, a Stoa that Paul would reason in right there. Let's look at verses 18 through 20 of Acts 17. Some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers also conversed with him. So he's talking with the scholars of his day at this point. And some said, "What does this babbler wish to say?" Babbler, this word translated babbler, was a derogatory term back in Athens. It was like a known word that they would use to refer to speakers whose words were empty. Okay, so they said, "What does this guy who has nothing to say wish to say?" Literally, it means one who picks up bits of news like a bird, like just pecking at the ground, and just pecking at these seeds and then just dropping them. So the point is that he's ignorant, he's vulgar, he's a plagiarist because he's just picking up these bits of information and dropping them off just without thinking through them, without debating it within himself. He just heard this, and so he's repeating it. So it's a derogatory term for the way that he is speaking or the content of what he is speaking. Others, if we're resuming in the text, others said he seems to be a preacher of foreign divinities because he was preaching Jesus and the resurrection. Now, this doesn't jump out of the page to us, but this is actually one of the charges that was brought against Socrates, and one of the reasons why he was killed, why he was executed, was that he was preaching foreign divinities. Josephus said this. Josephus was a really significant ancient historian, a Jew who was also Roman. He said about the Athenians and about this specifically, preaching foreign divinities, "This was prohibited by law among them, and the penalty decreed for those who introduced a foreign god was death." So this is a heavy thing to say about Paul, that he seems to be, this is not like this guy's weird, he's preaching this weird divinity. This is more serious, that there's some clamors of something really, really illegal and punishable by death in their society. So they take him and they bring him to the Areopagus, is what it's called. And this is the traditional site of Areopagus. Now we're going to have a few different pictures, but this is from the Acropolis. So this is taken from the edge of that elevated space where the Parthenon is. And this right here is what is traditionally known as Mars Hill. If you were expecting something fancier, so was I. Turns out it's just a big old boulder that's just sitting in the middle of the city. So this boulder right here is Mars Hill. And the Areopagus, as you can tell, was this open air space where speakers would come and present. And just a couple pictures here. This is one section of it, so it's bigger than it might have looked like in that picture. This is just probably maybe a third of Mars Hill. That's my brother right there in the pink cap. He thought it was red. We informed him it was definitely pink, and it was great to see him wear it every day. Because my brother does not wear pink. But anyway, that's my brother right there, just kind of illustrating the size of Mars Hill. So again, open air space, and one more picture. This is from Mars Hill looking up at the Acropolis. So this is the reverse of the picture looking down at it. So this is looking back up at the Acropolis. So you can tell just kind of, it's just an open air rock where speakers would come and present. Now, this is the traditional site of where Paul was speaking. Most likely, it's actually not where Paul was speaking. So the Areopagus is what gave the name to the legal city council of Athens, because they started on the Areopagus, is where they would meet. And by the way, I think I said Mars Hill and Areopagus. Those are the same places. Ares is the Greek name for Mars, which is the same god, but the Roman name, Mars. So if I go back and forth, Mars Hill, Areopagus, same place. So Areopagus this is the hill of Areopagus. This is where the city council began meeting, the ancient supreme judicial council of Athens. So it originally met on this hill, but by Paul's day, they had probably moved down to the Agora and moved to what we were talking about just a moment ago. And this is the Stoa of Zeus that we were talking about. So this is where the city council would meet. And given the context that Paul was in some legal trouble right now, he's in some questionable territory, this is probably where he's brought. He's not brought to the open air place for speakers, probably brought to this Stoa to present to the Areopagite council. And we're going to if we skip down to the end, you can kind of see a glimpse of this in verse 34, Dionysius the Areopagite. So he was part of this really important council that Paul is brought in front of. So we're going to just, nothing fancy, but in the rest of our time, we're going to read from Acts 17. So they bring him to the Areopagus, they bring him to this council, saying, "May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting, for you bring some strange things to our ears. We wish to know, therefore, what these things mean." Dropping down to verse 22. So Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, said, "Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious." Again, we talked about temples everywhere. You can see the temple of Hephaestus up on the hill. Remember, the temple of Apollo is just to the right of this place. So even in this Stoa, temples that you can see, if you turn around, the Parthenon and all the temples up there are also in view. So you're very religious. "For I passed along, and I observed the objects of your worship. I found also an altar with this inscription, 'To the unknown God.' What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything." Now remember, just to pause real quick, not in temples made by hands. Just keep in mind, there are temples all around that are made out to these gods, right? So he says that he doesn't live in temples made by hands. "And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he is actually not far from each one of us. For," and here he quotes to poets who would have been known at this time, "For in him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your own poets have said. For we are indeed his offspring. Being then God's offspring, we ought not to think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of man. The times of ignorance God overlooked, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed. And of this he has given assurance to all, by raising him from the dead." Now this, don't miss here just the strangeness, the oddity of what he's saying. It's, I don't know, maybe something like someone coming into this church building in a nation surrounded by church buildings and saying, "Hey guys, God doesn't require or is not worshipped in church buildings. That's not how this works." Because if you're in the context of where Paul is, there are, again, temples everywhere, not just in Athens, all over Greece, all over the ancient world, all over Rome. There are temples everywhere. So Paul's coming in, and he says, look, the way that you're worshiping, the way that you are meeting God is not the way that God is to be met. And the evidence that he gives is because of this man. He says, of this he has given assurance to all by raising Jesus from the dead. So, the resurrection of Jesus is what Paul points to as the evidence for this new way of thinking about religion, this new way of thinking about God to the Athenian council members and philosophers. The evidence is that Jesus was raised from the dead. Now, resurrection was not a totally new idea to them. They had thought of this before. Half a millennium earlier, before Paul, the tragedian Achilles had put on the lips of Apollo, he said, "When the dust has soaked up the blood of a man, once he has died, there is no resurrection." So that was their stance. Their stance was the resurrection, the concept of resurrection is not a genuine one. But here Paul is, and he's saying, actually, this man, Jesus, God raised him from the dead. And that gives evidence to the fact that God is not what we always thought he was, at least the Athenian philosophical circles. He's not what we always thought he was. He's not worshipped in temples made with human hands. In fact, he's in all of us. In him, we live and move and have our very being. So it's this totally different way of looking at the world. And I think it also challenges us to look at the world in a different way. Because I don't know if we all interact with our world in a way that says that in him, I live and I move and I have my very being. That God is sustaining and existing, subsisting, outside, inside, under, over, all of reality. That our day-to-day life is lived within him. So it's this strange idea that Paul presents to the Athenians. I wish we could spend more time on it, but we're going to move on to verse 32. Now, when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked. Again, this is not an idea that is popular among them. But others said, "We will hear you again about this." So Paul went out from their midst, but some men joined him and believed, among whom were Dionysius the Areopagite, and a woman named Damaris, and others with them. Now, a note from church history, Eusebius, who's known as the first major church historian, Eusebius identifies this Dionysius as, this is a quote, the first shepherd of the diocese of the Corinthians. So, at least in theory, this is the same Dionysius, as far as we can tell. So he became an elder in the church at Corinth, is how we would put it, I believe. So, this Dionysius we find in church history as well. Now, I want to contrast what we heard from Paul and what Paul presents the modern philosophical ideas of his day as he's writing to the church at Corinth, which is where we're going to talk about next. This is the up close to the temple of Ephesus, by the way. But he's writing in 1 Corinthians 1, starting in verse 18. He says, "For the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom, it pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe. For Jews demand signs, and Greeks seek wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and folly to Gentiles. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men." So Paul is presenting a message that differs from what makes sense in our world and in the ancient world, which is that this man got up from his grave. And not only that, but in his moment of weakness, when he's being executed by the powerful Roman state, in that moment of utter weakness and vulnerability, he's actually the power of God. And in that moment, he's overturning all of what we think of as power, what we think of as wisdom. He's showing us that there's something different going on in our world, that God's power structures, that God's wisdom structures are actually upside down from our standards, that a man giving himself out of love for other people is actually the most powerful act a man can go through. So this is the message that Paul preaches in these first century churches. Again, this is him writing back later to the church that he's about to establish in Corinth, and we'll talk about that church in the coming weeks. But for tonight, I want to leave you with two pictures. The first one is, they're both from this building. This is the one that's outside of the building, and that is obviously Greek, but it says the Church of the Christ, so Church of Christ. And I don't know, maybe this was 2 or 3 weeks ago, we worshiped in Athens. So this church, this is not the only Church of Christ in Athens, but it's one of the ones, and we worship there. This is inside of the church building, and you can see that it was, I don't know if you can tell, but it was pre-packed in there. And actually, Curry and I went and sat down, and we started, it was the first time I've ever worshiped in a setting like that, and I didn't know, like, do you just be quiet? Do you talk to them and, like, try to say hello in Greek? Like, how do you handle yourself in this situation? And so we sat down next to a group of people that were around our age and turned to them, and they started talking to us in English. And turns out they are from Arkansas. So we went to Athens just to worship beside people from Arkansas. So that was pretty crazy. But anyway, it was really amazing worship service. It was conducted in like 4 different languages. They have refugees from different areas of the world that have come to them, and they are going out of their way to welcome them in and to even learn the languages of these people, to learn Farsi, to learn English for us, etc. So it's really amazing. It's inspirational for us to say that this church in the same city where Paul preached 1,972 years ago is still there, is still worshiping that God, the upside-down God that Paul presented to them. And they're doing what Paul did, which is adapting themselves to the culture around them to try to meet them with this upside-down message of the gospel and of Christ's kingdom. So that's the message I want to leave me with, and that whatever, it doesn't have to be learning a language, but in whatever small or big ways that we can, that we would go out into our world and spread the gospel, just like Paul did, to spread the good news of Jesus being king over everything. Tonight, if you've never submitted yourself to King Jesus, it's the time to do it. And what we do at the end of our sermons usually is to offer an invitation to those who are present, that you could come and talk to me or talk to someone else around you who looks like they know what they're doing. And you can tell them that you are interested in Jesus, that you want to know more about him. And we're all happy to talk to you about him, to talk to you about the church, and to answer any questions that you might have. Also, if you're just going through a tough time, or if you are a Christian already who's committed sins and you want to confess them, you want to ask for forgiveness, you want to turn your life around, then also you have the opportunity now to come forward as we stand and sing together.